If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, haunted trail/house workers. What's the craziest thing you've seen/heard on the job? Worked in a haunted attraction for 5 years and one comes to mind. I played a stereotypical crazy doctor in a scene with other actors. The basic layout is you would enter the hospital, get on an elevator, fake, go down a toxic hallway, and finally meet me. The walls were thin and made of plywood. I remember one night, group walks in already screaming. I think awesome, easy scare and easy group. They step in the elevator and lose it. I hear them run out the elevator and toward the hall. I get ready in my normal position. I would stand behind the door to my office and scare people out of the scene. This didn't happen. This group crashes through the wall. I scream like a little girl, which scares them more. They run through another wall. At this point, I just want them out to get my scene back in order. But then another actor from another scene shows up at the exit with a chainsaw. The groups run through their makeshift doors back through my scene. We had to then scare them back through the scene to get them to move on. People were banned from bringing chainsaws in my scene after that. Worst thing I witnessed while working in one, aside from the typical piss/shit/vomit, was this one time towards the end of our run. We would go for about 4 to 5 hours a night if it was busy. Reset times in between groups was exhausting. Some really horrible kids came through kicking the sets and props and trying to hit some of the actors. One of the girls, B, had her own room in which she sat in a really dark corner on a metal barrel. She would normally scare people by rattling it or knocking a stick against it to get their attention, but in doing this one time, these kids ran over to her and started laughing and trying to choke her out. We only found out about it because the next group that followed these kids found B passed out on the floor. Security grabbed those and the police came and took them away, not sure what happened to them. But B ended up having to go to hospital and didn't return for the rest of the season, which was sad, because despite her scare being very simple, it was so good at getting people moving through the corridor. It was a shit night. I was volunteering at a haunted trail when I was 12 because we had an assignment that entailed doing community service for school. Hearing this, I thought the best thing I could do was working for free as a zombie. What could be better? So the night rolls around and I'm fitted with my zombie costume. We walk out into the woods where I'm led to my coffin behind a chain that separates the trail from the path that folks walk on through the forest. When the tour guide would show up with a new group of people, they would wave a flashlight near me as my cue for me to pop out of the coffin and hit a fake dismembered leg against the side. Night starts, a few groups go by and I'm feeling pretty good about the whole thing. About halfway through the night, I see the flashlight and do my usual routine. A little kid shrieks and for God only knows what reason, the kid's dad looks at his son, looks at me and starts sprinting at me. He clears the chain easily, runs right up to me, pulls me up out of the coffin with his bare hands, puts his finger in my face and says, "Cut it out, you little shit." He then walks back to his son, consoling him, and they walk back through the trail. I was flabbergasted, and I just left the trail right then and there, walking past groups in full zombie attire. I then walked home, took off everything and just sat stunned in my bathroom trying to make sense of everything/not cry. To this day, I still have absolutely no fucking idea why a guy would take his 5-year-old kid into a haunted trail and start physically roughing up the ghosts and goblins working in there. I don't know what happened with that father and son, but the attraction after me was a guy dressed as Leatherface, running out of the forest with a real chainsaw. Can only imagine. I worked at the Markov's Haunted Forest in Maryland, which is widely regarded as one of the best haunted attractions on the East Coast. It has 2 paths that go winding through the forest filled with different scenes and props ranging from church basements, to a creepy monkey village, to just narrow pitch black tunnels you navigate by feel. I was in the church basement scene this night and I had a sweet spot where none of the lights touched, making it pitch black. People would walk up to me suspicious that someone would be there, but it really was pitch black. They would feel reassured because they were so close they would have to see someone if they were there, but nope, hey, it's me. Tons of great scares. The trails are always busy from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., but this night there was a strange gap of no people for roughly 30 minutes. That never happens. Finally a family came along, 2 teen girls and their parents. I got these girls good. Real good. Like I could see the imminent death in their eyes good. Then after they passed it was another 30-minute pause of people only to have the normal flow of people return. Later on we found out that it was the Obama girls going through the trails with Secret Service acting as their parents. No one was told ahead of time for security reasons obviously, and we only learned after the fact. The gaps of people were to allow them to slip in and enjoy the trail without anyone else having the opportunity to realize who they were and interrupt them. So I got to scare the hell out of the Obama girls. That was cool. I worked a haunt 1 year and was set up in a butcher room. I had a pig mask and a table saw. No one cared where the saw sound was coming from, just that it was loud and scary, but the best part was the guy missing part of his arm working my room. He had lost a portion of his arm right below the elbow, still had his elbow and about 2 inches of forearm. He'd sit on the floor and prop a fake severed arm near his stump, and pretend to be cutting through his arm with a knife. Attendees could hear almost there. Almost there. As they walked into the room. Once he grabbed the fake arm with his good hand, and started waving the stump, I'd see full-grown men push their girlfriends and wives away and run at full speed. It was hilarious. People get punched in the face all the time. Seriously, if you react to being scared by punching someone, don't go to a haunted house. I spent 4 years at a haunted house, so here is my highlight reel. Woman went into labor inside the haunt. Water broke and all. Actor tried to scare his mom. Mom freaked out, not recognizing her son, ended up breaking his arm. Multiple seizures. Lots of people pee/shit themselves. Sometimes you get lucky and someone pukes. Grand finale, I was working the front lines when the owner came running up to me telling me to call 911. His exact words were, "Some dude just busted a nut in the line." Or more accurately, ruptured. Some kid had a pre-existing condition that caused his testicle to explode while waiting to get into the haunt. Customers that overheard the conversation had a lot of questions. In 6th grade, our elementary school did a haunted house fundraiser. It wasn't anything big. They set up a maze in one of the classrooms and has a bunch of decorations and people popping out of places to scare everyone. It was actually pretty well put together and scary. I volunteered to work because I love to scare people. Anyways, my job was to monitor the maze and help anyone or fix stuff. I brought my werewolf mask and I would stand still like a statue and tap on people's shoulders when they turned around or jump at them if I had the chance. There was this dad walking his young son through, and it was obvious he was terrified. His dad was comforting him by saying that it was fake and he shouldn't be worried. I didn't want to scare him, so I just stood still. His dad then pointed me and said, "Look, the werewolf is fake too," and then to show how fake I was, he smacked my mask. It wasn't hard and didn't hurt, but my mask and glasses came right off. He apologized left and right, saying he didn't know I was real. I wasn't mad or anything, I just thought it was hilarious that I actually looked like a prop. Due to my size, there are typically only a few roles I can play at these kinds of things. One of the most memorable ones I had though was working for a friend. He rented out this big house with a lake out back. So while they all worked on what they were going to do, I had to choose between Bigfoot or Jason Voorhees. Lo and behold, 3 nights later I'm freezing my ass off in 2 dry suits with a Jason costume over them, fucking terrifying people because I was so out of place. The rest of the haunted house was vampire themed, and then you got outsider and I stiffly pull myself out of the water, grab the fake knife and run at them. The night passes on until I pull myself out, grab my knife and charge the group. Then I hear it. 3 dudes in the group pulled fake swords, yell Deus Vult. Slay the demon. And run towards me as well. All 4 of us just started laughing over what had just happened. That's the best I can think of right now, but I'll put more in if I can think of them. When I worked at a haunted house, I was put in a scene with one of my good friends and my twin sister. They decided to put us in a doll house with lots of mangled porcelain dolls and stuffed animals with their body parts missing. My good friend is a very small girl and she could fit into the smallest of places. There was this grandfather clock that we had in the first room, and she would remove the pendulum and hide in there while we shouted at patrons to play hide and seek with us. She would scare so many people with that spot, it was unreal. We also played the twin thing off as much as possible, both me and my sister being small as well. I would hide behind a small dresser and get a jump scare as soon as a group came through. Right after my scare, my twin would get them from the other side of the room and we would come together like the twins from The Shining. You wouldn't believe how many people are scared of little kids. I had a blast making people fall on their asses while also mind fucking them with the twin thing. Ah, fun times. Worked at a haunt for 5 years. Had to quit after my last year cause of 2 incidences that I caused on accident. Before the stories, I need to paint a picture. I'm 6 feet 4 inches and close to 400 pounds with a 2-foot tall mohawk at the time. First incident, a coworker was traveling through the house using pop doors to get through quicker to their room. I heard them coming and figured I would try to scare them. They come in my hallway and I popped my head around the corner at them. He reaches for the wall as his whole body goes stiff and he falls flat on his face, breaking his nose and going into a seizure. Later found out that he stopped taking his meds, so I didn't feel as bad as I did when it happened. The second one was the last scare in a haunt that I ever did. An older gentleman and his granddaughter Cam were making their way to my hallway. I stood in the middle of the hallway so they could see me in the strobe light, then jumped in my pop door to scare them. I pop out and they both stumble backwards into a corner. So I pin them in the corner with my arms, yelling that they will never leave because I'm going to eat them alive. The man's eyes stared at me and slowly opened wider and wider before his eyes rolled into the back of his head as he slid limp down to the floor in the corner. I drop the act and grab his hand, asking if he is okay, and he doesn't respond. I yell for help and that we had a party down. The house owner and makeup artist come flying into the hallway telling me to get back. They call 911 and they get there a few minutes later. The EMTs tell us that he is having a heart attack as they get him on the stretcher. At that point I walked to the back room and sat down with a bottle of water and started to cry. I felt so bad that I took off my costume and left and never went back. Found out from a friend that the man came back a few weeks later to talk to me. He told them he felt bad that I quit and that out of all the haunted houses he had went to, it was me that got him the best and he loved it. I still feel bad for both of those incidents almost 19 years later. I once worked as the sound/video monitor technician for a popular haunted house in Houston, Texas. My primary duty was to keep an eye on the camera screens, for security and liability purposes, as well as adjusting the sound makers and music volume and content, when needed. I remember one night a long time ago, we had a group of women on a bachelorette party walk through the first room of the haunted house. As I was monitoring the cameras when they walked in, I noticed that one of the women in particular, the woman who was getting married, was clearly drunk at the time and appeared to be the most frightened of all the women as they all creeped their way into the dark room. She was, literally, holding her breasts as she slowly proceeded through the room in the dark, apparently to ease her reaction to anything that pops out at her. Since our cameras having night vision capable lens, I could see everything clear as day. Then, once the first scene commenced, a first monster popped out around the corner dressed as a crazy doctor with a knife. The bride-to-be was so ridiculously terrified that she began convulsing for a few seconds and then decided to powerfully tackle the coworker of mine, let's call him Jeff, against a brick wall so hard that it knocked the wind out of him. Somehow her shirt got ripped and her breasts were literally hanging out. Jeff was on the ground at this point, struggling to breath. She then pulled out a taser gun she had on her, which we have no idea how she got in with, and proceeded to fire the taser directly at Jeff's chest, rendering him completely unconscious. I then immediately stopped everything. I shut off all the background music, the fog/mist, turned on all the lights and got onto the intercom speaker system and said with a very stern voice, exit the facility now. You guys are done. Security will be waiting for you outside. She and her friends began crying drunkenly and uncontrollably. Our site manager was on the scene within seconds of hearing my voice over the speaker system. He checked on Jeff, who was unconscious, and told the women to exit to the nearest door immediately and that charges would be pressed against them for this. We then had to contact the police and get them involved because Jeff almost had to go to the hospital. Not only did our business press charges against the woman and her friends, but Jeff also pressed charges for assault and battery. That was one hell of a night. We lost a lot of business that night because of this incident. When I was a teenager, my younger brothers and I decided to set up our front walkway with some scare the trick-or-treaters props. First, the setup. Our house had a front walkway that was bordered by the wall of the house on the left, and a rickety wooden fence with a gate on the right. The carport was on the other side of the wooden fence. The front door faced the carport and was directly across from the gate. Basically, you had to walk through a narrow hallway to get to the front door on the left, or through the gate to the carport on the right. My brothers hauled a record player onto the roof and had an album of spooky sounds that they put on. This was in 1975 or so, and we were poor, so we didn't even have speakers. Just the loud, tinny sound of a portable turntable. We made a human figure of stuffed clothing and hung it by the neck from the rafters of the walkway. Brother Bob rigged little red lights for eyes. Brother David built a coffin and placed it on the side of the house in the walkway. He dressed himself as Dracula and took his place in the coffin. Bob dressed himself as some sort of monster and then draped chains all over his chest and the gate, essentially chaining himself to the fence. I dressed as a witch and waited at the door to pass out candy. The overall effect from the street wasn't too intimidating, just the music and the dead hanging body. The plan was to scare the bejesus out of the kids after they passed the entrance. And scare them we did. Now, remember, this is 1975. Parents stood at the sidewalk if there were parents in attendance at all. These brave little kids walked up our sidewalk with both eyes fixed on the dead body. Once they got past that horror, they were now in the walkway when David would sit up in his coffin, scaring them into running toward the front door. Once there, they never even saw Bob until he lunged at them, the chains holding him back. I would open the door, cackling like the witch I am, to give them candy, However, the poor traumatized kids would blast into the house screaming and crying. Not a one of them would agree to go back out the front door, or come near me, either, so my mother had to escort them through the kitchen and out into the carport so they could run screaming into their parents' arms. We were a success. Every kid in our neighborhood probably had nightmares about us that night. We never did it again though. It was a one-night show. But, our legend lived on. From 1975 until they sold the house in 1988, my parents never had a single trick or treater again. Mom would stand at the door with her little bags of candy and hear the kids screaming at their parents to run past the house. Nobody came to the door. Nobody. Ever. Again. I used to work at a popular Halloween attraction called the Slaughterhouse. If you're in Arizona, you've probably heard of it. Technically I was a volunteer, but they donated money to my school if we worked, so it counts to me. I was working there before it was all set up as a Halloween attraction. At the time it was just an empty, abandoned slaughterhouse that people used to have raves in. And even without all the spooky shit put up and people running around in straitjackets, that place is creepy as fuck. My classmates and I were charged with cleaning that place up, and we found some weird ass shit in there. Firstly, we had to clean off the roof balcony. It was covered in mummified dead cats. I have no clue why there was so many dead cats up there, but it was very chilling. On the second floor, there was a chapel. I'm not really sure why a slaughterhouse needed a chapel, but there was one in there. That room was absolutely horrifying. It was uncomfortably dark in there, and the moment you crossed the threshold of the door you immediately felt freezing. I went in there once alone and I could see my breath. We ended up leaving it be because no one wanted to go in there, we just left the pews be. During the actual haunts, there was a lot of mishaps that had never happened before. And I worked the haunt when it was at different locations, nothing like this shit ever happened before. One part of the haunt has a room called the plexiglass room. This shit was sturdy. It was basically a huge thick window and people in straitjackets stood behind it and screamed, threw themselves at it, and threw various shit in the room, chairs, barrels, etc., at it as people walked past. I literally hit that thing with a hammer before and it was completely fine. Well, the first day we open, one of the actors throws a plastic jug at that plexiglass and it shatters all over a bunch of people walking through, and we have to shut down that part of the haunt and clean it all up. The next thing that happened maybe a week later. A group of girls are walking through the haunt and everything is fine and they're finishing it up. At the exit there's no actors, so as not to scare people and make them fall down the stairs. Well, something spooks this girl and she books it out of the haunt, trips, and falls over the railing and lands on her neck. We have to shut down the haunt again, and I think she may have broken her neck. I don't know, we didn't get any info after an ambulance took her away. Then there was just various parts of the set falling over, actors getting injured, a bee flew up my nose while I was working, and actors getting scared shitless. I'm 100% sure that place is haunted or cursed or something. There's been quite a few deaths there. Back when it was an actual slaughterhouse, an employee slipped on the old lift in the building, fell off, and the lift crushed him. My boyfriend's father is a paramedic, and often had to respond to people going back when the slaughterhouse was used for raves. I won't go back in there, even to enjoy the haunts. That place is creepy. Worked at a haunted house a few years during high school. To get a mental image, to get to where I was you went through the house, a ton of rooms made of plywood, walk outside to a kind of hall, around two corners to where my friend was hiding, turn, there I was hiding in a church, and around another corner to where my other friend was hiding with a chainsaw. A few stories, had an older lady, 50s 60s, walk past me and she goes, in the most upbeat voice I got so scared in there I almost farted. To her friend. I had to take a minute. There was some teenager guy going through, trying to be the cool kid, acting like a badass in front of his friends. Harassing monsters, trying to touch us, act. The owner of the maze came through and grabbed this kid by his arm, and growls, "If you touch my monsters, I'll let them touch you." Then he points at me in my zombie outfit. I bit down on the blood capsule in my mouth and grinned. This kid pissed himself and ran. One slow night around midnight we heard a group coming through the house. Now at the end of the hall outside the house, was a guy dressed as a scarecrow with a shovel. He was supposed to become animated and scare people, whatever. Anyway, he had fallen asleep leaning on his shovel, and when the group went by, he fell right in front of them, and scared the crap out of them. My friends and I ran a neighborhood haunted house for nearly 15 years in NKC No. Probably the best story I have is the one where we had the chainsaw near the end of the house. It was a corner where the chainsaw guy hid and then a straight shot out the back to the exit. Well, this one girl gets so freaked out by the chainsaw firing up that she takes off at a sprint and keeps running almost a full city block down the street from the haunted house. Went back in and high-fived Chainsaw Guy just for the laughs he provided. Second story, I was working as a slide safety operator at the Beast Haunted House in Kansas City, and my job was mostly just being in the open and make sure people are being safe. I was still in costume, but for the most part they just wanted me to make sure everything was okay. These three little 10 to 12-year-old wise asses come down the slide, and by the time the third gets down the others try to sneak up behind me, scare me. I'm at this point bent over checking the slide, so I just wait 2 seconds, stand up to my full height, turn around, so I am literally lording over them, and I had taken a huge lungful of air and just let out the most terrifying sound I've ever made in my life. Lost my voice for at least an hour. 2 of them just dropped to the floor. One of them starts crab walking backwards right into Jack the Ripper, who was in my area as the main scare. Needless to say, I still think that he has stains in his underwear to this day. I've had about 5 to 6 years of experience working in my brother's fiance's family's haunted house on Halloween and 4 years of working for a major theme park. I've seen a guide for a haunted house dislocate her knee, drunk guests trying to molest everyone, and groups of the most muscle-bound macho dudes screaming like schoolgirls as they ran from me in the dark. None of that stuff holds a candle to last year when I was in a vampire western-themed attraction. I manned the pitch-black entrance, joined by a pair of beautiful female vampires who attacked the groups from all sides. One day I was completely exhausted by working 2 jobs without any sleep, completely my own stupid fault. My manager saw that I was close to falling apart, so we sat against a wall in the dark and cracked corny/insanely nonsensical jokes with each other in strange voices. The vampire girls were leading the groups to the inner sanctum as we said stuff like this: "Why did the chicken cross the road? I don't know. Why? Who cares? Ha." It seems like the dumbest freaking thing in the world, but it totally fucking worked. People were terrified by the voices that were coming from out of nowhere behind them. The jokes just seemed to creep them out even more as they were being lured in. I loved working with all of them. I'm a little late to this party, but I do have a story worth sharing. I worked on the hayride at my local haunted attraction when I was in high school. On busy nights, they would run 2 tractors with trailers behind them, which would drive through about every 10 to 15 minutes. One night, we noticed that it had been a good half an hour since the last tractor came through. It was odd, but the longer it took, the longer we got to stand next to our fire and keep warm, so we weren't worried. About a half an hour after that, someone finally came through and explained what the holdup was. Apparently, one of the tractor drivers had gotten drunk while maneuvering the trailer full of people through the woods. He took a turn a little too sharp and clipped a tree, except he didn't just clip the tree, he managed to wedge a woman's leg between the tree and the trailer. When this was brought to the drunk tractor driver's attention, instead of backing the tractor up and releasing the poor woman, he immediately ran into the woods toward the highway. He didn't get far before being caught, and the woman's leg was more or less fine, but I just couldn't believe that it all happened. I worked in a haunted corn maze for a season my senior year of high school in 2010. My position was the down scarecrow, which meant that I spent the night with my bottom half in a pit about 5 feet deep. My top half was lying face down on the ground, halfway in the path, and next to me was a stuffed pair of pants to make the scene look more realistic. I would wait there until a group walked past, at which point I'd jump out and chase them, making screeching noises. So one night I'm lying there, halfway out of my pit, when I heard a group coming. Nothing special. As they made their approach, I could hear them talking. I can't remember too much of the conversation, but I recall them talking about cross country, and then I heard one mention a scarecrow on the ground ahead. Good, I thought. This will be an easy scare, they don't suspect a thing. Just as they're about to pass me and I'm getting ready to make my advance, I felt a huge thud against the back of my head and I became dazed for a few seconds. One of those fuckers had kicked me in the back of the head, believing I was an actual scarecrow. Needless to say, I shot out of that pit like a bat out of hell and gave them the scare of a lifetime. A year later in college, I was reconnecting with a buddy from my childhood, and I don't know how it came up, but we started chatting about past jobs. I mentioned I worked in a haunted corn maze and he asked which one. Turns out he had been to the same maze I worked at the year before. What's more, it turned out he was there with his cross-country team for a team building exercise, and he was the one who kicked me in the head. I guess not that crazy, but definitely a coincidence. Worked haunted houses and with a club of professional zombies for 4 years. So I have many tales. Our zombie group had been commissioned by an Airsoft arena to do a lock-in night. They had an entire town set up in this arena, empty buildings, buses, watchtowers, etc. People paid to go inside for like 6 or so hours and try to survive a zombie apocalypse and find a cure for it. All the zombies started out in this chained-off area at the back of the town and would gradually be let out. Before they were even let in the town, we had a small female actor who ran to the front doors, covered in blood, screaming and trying to escape. The actors in full battle rattle army gear would pull her screaming and kicking back into the facility. She kept warning everyone not to go in, it was a trap, etc. Only she was really good and a couple people almost left before wet even started. After 20 minutes of them wandering around, I was the first zombie to be let loose. I'm stumbling down this road where I see our female actor yelling at some guys. They're giving her shit, saying how lame it all is. She sees me out of the corner of her eye and backs up laughing like a loon. She turns to them and goes, "I warned you. Now you're going to end up just like them." She points at me right as I stumble into the streetlight. My face is filled with these puss and blood-filled holes, I'm covered in blood, my teeth are all jacked. And I just let out the most guttural, spit-throwing snarl/scream I can muster. I have never seen two grown men run so quickly in my life. Which sparked a huge commotion and sent most of the guests running and screaming to get out. They didn't let them out. At the end of the night we had another kid who had been so terrified he crawled onto the broken down bus, which was literally swarmed by all the zombies, curled up into a ball, pissed and puked all over himself because he was so scared. Kid was like 14 or 15. It was great. I have a few more but if anyone would be interested. Worked at a very popular haunted house for a couple of seasons. It was a really fun, but physically exhausting job. 6 to 8 hours on your feet with like 2 5-minute breaks, and the sheer amount of dust in the warehouse caused my face to swell up. I had my own quiet little scene area as a marionette, so I got to flail around on ropes and interact a lot. Occasionally some assholes would come through and make stripper jokes, throw dollars, generally try to get me to break character and hold up the other guests. But I had a window behind my area that I could run to and scare the ever-loving shit out of them later. Greater than there were a lot of aggressive customers that would throw drinks, spit, or assault the actors. Someone got choked on my shift once, and a guy literally picked up and moved my friend when she was giving her rules/intro speech. The people who worked there every year were very cool. The resident Beetlejuice guy made a special fuss of me and my friend during a walkthrough, inserting himself into random scenes and chatting us up in character, to the confusion of other patrons. If you ever go through a haunted house, try to react to the actors even if you're not scared, and please respect their personal space. Those guys work super hard, and every scare is really gratifying after a while. Never worked at one, but I think I probably take the cake for at least a few people who did. I am deathly afraid of little people. It's an irrational fear. I know they are people, I can't explain it, they just scare me. Myself and my lady friend go into this haunted house that is 4-in-1. It takes roughly an hour to get through all of it and I'm not scared at all. We have passed all the typical scares, mad scientists, wolfman monsters, all of it. We are going into the last area, which has a few cages and is brightly colored, looks like a circus. I love clowns, have no fear of them at all. I'm thinking I'm going to make it out without embarrassing myself in front of my lady friend. Then I see them, 2 midget clowns come from behind one of the cages and come running at us. Before I even realize it, I go running straight for one of the cages that don't have little people around, not looking back, leaving my lady friend standing alone dumbfounded as I jump on the cage screaming. It took the little fuckers leaving the area to get me to come down. You would think that this would ruin my chances with my lady friend, but she found it too hilarious to be mad. We are now engaged. Worked a YMCA haunted house for 3 years as Carver the Clown. A costume that would probably get me shot today. One year they had me sitting on this bus with a couple of other scare actors and a few dummies leaning up against the wall. We waited until people walked by to spook them. Had one couple come around twice. First time I scared the guy so bad I'm pretty sure he shit himself. When they came around the second time and saw me, he started freaking out and shouted, "No. You scared me already." The next night I was sitting in the driver's seat and waiting to scare a group. The first thing I see when I turn is a hand coming straight for my face. Some rotund black woman did a palm strike straight to my eye. Went and hit the 2 girls I was working with as well. Needless to say, we were a little miffed. Last year I did it. We had kind of a weird layout. People waited in this one part of the building before going outside and entering the haunted house proper. I was assigned to the front most of the nights. Scared some people so bad just standing there and doing this creepy laugh that they didn't even want to come in. In the section between the building and the haunted house, a bunch of people kept congregating despite my attempts to scare them off. Somebody actually threw rocks at me before the cops cleared the place out. At another point in the night, this one guy came up to me and told me he wanted to volunteer. Since we'd all signed up a while back, I told him he couldn't. Guess who showed up a little while later with a mask anyway? Found a cop, and he told him to get lost. I enjoyed doing it, but my mom made me stop after the issues that year. My Girl Scout troop used to help our city haunt a hayride. The route would wind around the 2+ miles of trails surrounding this park, through wooded segments, open areas with ball fields, etc. Well, one year we were assigned an area-themed haunted hospital. The leader's daughter would sprawl out on this table and scream bloody murder as two other girls dressed like blood-splattered doctors tossed around dyed spaghetti guts and cackled like mad. Not far from the hospital set was the graveyard part. It was pretty cool. They gave us real coffins to use and a bunch of headless/limbless dummies. We strung some on them from the trees above the wagon's path and would drop them down to swing above the riders as they went by, and plastic bones and stuff. I quickly found two routines that got pretty good screams. I'd lie in one of the laying down coffins and set one of the dummies on my chest. When I heard the wagon pull up to me, I'd shriek like a banshee and launch the dummy towards the wagon as though it had leapt out of the coffin. The other one made use of one of the coffins that had been leaned upright against a tree. That one I'd get into, and then lunge out hissing as the wagon came up. One time my heel caught the rim and nearly sent the thing crashing into the wagon. No one was hurt, but there were some genuine screams from that one. I used to work at a supposedly haunted historical site doing ghost tours. The tours ended in a pitch black room with a story about hundreds of people being roasted alive during a fire, followed by a jump scare delivered by one of the other guides. If you were on jumping duty, you would hide in the corridor, leap into the room, scream, then run like hell because, as the rest of this thread illustrates, a lot of people respond violently to getting the scare they paid for. I'm pretty short, so I could leg it in safety, but taller guides had to beware of the low beam over the stairs, as one of them found to his cost. So we had a new guide. Let's call him Angus, because why not? It was standard practice for new guides to start out doing jumps before they began doing tours, so Angus spent his first night on jumping duty. There was a large group of Boy Scouts on the tour, and they all freaked out beautifully when Angus made his appearance. He ran down the corridor, pulling off his mask as he went, and ran straight into the low beam over the stairs. Knocked himself flat on his back, concussed himself, found himself lying on the ground bleeding from his forehead. In his dazed state, he decided he needed help, so he staggered to his feet and headed for the nearest source of aid, the room full of terrified teenaged boys. Angus reappeared, white-faced and bleeding, rasping at them to get help, and succeeded in freaking them out all over again. One of them threw a camcorder at him. It hit him in the face, and this was the 90s, so camcorders weren't small or light. He ended up in hospital. Haunted house, more like room, volunteer here. I've several of these stories, although I'm not sure if this'll fit in. First one was that time when I made two patrons run through the entire attraction screaming. Basically, I was very small back then, still am now, just a little less smaller, dressed in dark clothing and ran around with a deck of cards. I'd pop up randomly and throw cards at the patrons, aiming to miss. Well, two teenaged girls entered. I popped up, threw the card, and it whistled past one of their ears. They freaked out and ran through the rest of the section screaming, knocking everything in their way over. The damage was so bad, we had to close for 20 minutes to get everything back into place. The second one involved a one-room haunted house, which was basically a dark version of a restaurant. You had to find 5 bills scattered around the room to redeem for a ticket that would let you out, with actors positioned throughout the room to scare them. We'd change the layout of the room and position of the bills every time so that nobody could spoil anything. Well, there was this one time I climbed up a stack of chairs and hid there. A bunch of annoying teens walk in, dismissing and generally laughing at everyone. They point to me and grin, saying, "Look, their hiding is so shitty we can see them." Unfortunately, they were right next to the chair stack, so I jumped down screeching like an angry barn owl, and landed right next to them. They screamed as well, and ran for the door, only to crash right into it cartoon style. They started pounding on the door demanding to be let out, and the clown at the door said, "Sorry folks, where's your ticket?" Long story short, they had to find 3 more bills. And when they went to redeem their ticket, they got another scare from the 2 lovely masked ladies manning the table. Never seen people so relieved to get out. This year is my first time being a haunted house actor. My girlfriend, who is one of the makeup artists, shares a role with me as the spirit from Lights Out. We wear black bodysuits and have the makeup done similarly to how the spirit appears in the film, and I wear a wig similarly styled to the spirits, and she has her hair done in this way. What happens is that when a patron enters our bit, we stand on both sides of a pitch black room and glare back at them. We have to wear goggles with reflectors, as the actress said she did in the film. When the patrons see us, they turn back to flip on the light, which is only backlights. We disappear into a nearby side hall. When the patron flips the lights back off and on, we keep creeping closer, and dive into the side hall, and then right at the end we jump out on either side of them and scare them. The other night, a group of women appeared and we do our thing. When we came out to scare them, one of the women turned towards me and kicked me in the nuts hard. Hard enough for me to actually collapse on the floor in pain. We had to stop for about 20 minutes so that the coordinators could make sure that I was all right.